I found out my wife hired a hitman to kill me, so I paid him more. Someone else paid him even more. It was late at night, and my wife was asleep. With a small table light on, I sat alone downstairs on my laptop, searching. Well, I'll leave that to your imagination. I heard a slight creak from upstairs, but I'm used to those little creaks. This had been my routine for the last several months. Our marriage wasn't always like this, but recently we have been drifting apart. She's become distant, and it's like she's just going through the motions. Sex consists of me lying on top while she stares at the ceiling. We are still a young couple in our early 30s, but unlike our friends who stayed together because they had kids, we enjoy our dinner parties and game nights too much. But now our marriage had become stale, and we were too afraid to be left on the shelf. I finally relieved myself, to put it politely. Like every night before, I went through the ritual of deleting my internet browser history. I had no choice, as my wife often uses my laptop to order stuff. As I went to press delete and cleanse my soul, I noticed a site called Sinister. That's strange. I didn't recall ever visiting that site. I clicked on the link and it took me to a dark web forum page. And there is no way my wife's been on here. She's the definition of vanilla. Against my better judgment, I decided to read the page. And there was a conversation between two usernames. Gus, the name of our cat, and the other, Haystack. I scrolled through the messages and my eyes widened in shock. My wife had hired a hitman to kill me. I slunk into bed beside her. I laid flat on my back, wide awake. Every time she stirred or turned over, I flinched. Should I leave? Should I call the cops? Why does she want me dead? All these thoughts raced through my mind. The next morning, I was shattered. I didn't sleep at all. How could I after finding out my wife hired a hitman to kill me? We have a routine before work where Alice brews the coffee while I prepare breakfast, usually porridge and fruit. Yes, we are one of those health freak couples. While we eat breakfast, we rarely converse. Over the years, we've slowly run out of things to say. Out of the blue, Alice asked, "What have you got on today?" I stared at her. She never asks me about my day. Why is she asking now? I stayed vague. Just a lot of meetings. Alice continued, "Any important?" Why is she probing me? Is she looking to inform the hitman to my whereabouts? Brad and I have a meeting with the board over the merger, I replied. Alice quietly left the table. I couldn't concentrate at the board meeting. There's no way my wife, who I exchanged vows with, could have hired a hitman. I was in a nightmare and I was ready to wake up. And the timescales? The CEO asked. A round table of suits stared at me. I snapped out of my trance. Yes, the timescales are fine, I replied. As I left the board meeting, my business partner Brad caught up to me in the corridor. Brad was a little older and had a speckle of gray in his beard, making him distinguished. Is everything okay? He asked. Sorry, I couldn't sleep last night, I replied. Brad smiled. Go home, get some rest. You need to be at your best tonight. Tonight? I asked. He looked at me funny. Yes, our weekly game night. You're hosting. With everything going on, I had totally forgotten. Ine. It was getting late at work. Everyone had left the office floor. I sat anxiously in my cubicle, too afraid to go home. What if the hitman was waiting for me to leave? After all, my wife would have likely informed the hitman of where I worked. A cleaning crew entered the office floor. One guy had a skull tattoo on his arm. Is he here to kill me? I told myself to stop being crazy. I had a game night to host. I entered the office's underground parking garage. The lights switched on as I walked to my car. I heard footsteps from behind and turned sharply. A security attendant politely nodded. I took a deep breath. If that was the hitman, I would already be dead. I would never have seen it coming. On my journey home, I kept glancing in my rear view. An SUV was keeping its distance. Up ahead, the stoplight turned red and I was forced to slow down. The SUV pulled up beside me at the lights. I looked across but couldn't see anyone through the blacked out windows. My heart was pounding. The light turned green and the SUV drove off in another direction. Back at home, we hosted our game night with two other couples. One couple was Alan and Jules, who always told stories of their latest wine tasting weekends. They were incredibly superficial, but that's why we liked them. And then there was Brad and his devoted wife, Kara, who weren't drinking tonight. They were going through their third IVF cycle. My wife chose the adult game Bad Choices, which was ironic as it's designed to find out your darkest secrets. I somehow managed to keep my composure during the game. Everyone enjoyed the questions, giving silly answers. Alice was the life and soul of the party. How can she act so sociable after what she's done? Did I even know her? It was my turn, and I decided this was the perfect opportunity to slip in my own question. Would you ever hire a hitman to kill your significant other? My aim was to get Alice to confess in front of everyone. As I was about to ask my question, Alice stood up and asked, "Would anyone like more wine?" Jules quipped, "Do you have a 1920 Buell?" Alan looked at Alice. "He's such a bitch." Everyone laughed. Alice went into the kitchen and Brad joined her. "I'll help you pour." A few minutes later, they arrived back, and Brad is drinking a glass of wine. Kara looked down and sipped her water. I took a deep sigh and asked a question on the card. "Have you ever looked through your spouse's phone?" Everyone put their hands up. After the couples finally left, I waited for my wife to go to bed. I went back on the dark web forum. I still wasn't convinced my wife ordered the hit. What if it was just a fantasy? That would be disturbing, but at least my life wouldn't be in danger. I scrolled through the rest of the forum and saw dozens of spouses ordering hits. At what point did their love go rotten? I reread my wife's chilling conversation with the hitman. There was no doubt she had ordered my death. It was like I was nothing more than a bug waiting to be zapped. I violently hurled into my waste paper bin. I wiped the vomit from my mouth and reached for my cell to call the cops. I couldn't make the call. Even though my wife despised me, I couldn't bear for her to spend the rest of her life behind bars. Okay, there must be another way. Maybe I could get the hitman to call it off. I set up a new profile and messaged the hitman asking to meet. I stared at the screen, awaiting a response. I had no idea how long it takes hitmen to reply. A few minutes later, a message appeared from the hitman. "Why?" I quickly typed, "I need you to take special care of my wife." Yes, I know I'm incriminating myself, but it was the only way to get the hitman to agree to meet me. The hitman answered, "Seals tonight." It was now 1 a.m. I snuck out of the house and drove to Seal's bar, which was located by the docks. I glanced out of my window as I passed the dark waters. I arrived and parked close to the entrance, just in case I needed to make a quick getaway. I tentatively entered the dive bar. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to leave. The bar was nearly empty, with only a handful of unsavory characters hunched over their drinks. They all looked capable of killing a man. One already had. I ordered 2 beers and sat alone at a table near the back of the bar. I took a sip of beer, but my hands were trembling so much I spilt it down my shirt. I waited for over half an hour. This is batshit crazy, I thought. As I got up to leave, a tall, thin, middle-aged guy with long, greasy hair swiveled the chair in front of me and sat backward on it. His hawk eyes pointed to one of the beers. "Mine?" I struggled to speak and just nodded. The hitman took a long swig of beer. "Are you a cop?" he asked. Before I could answer, he sniggered, exposing his rotten meth teeth. "Cops don't waste beer." I realized he had been studying my every move since I arrived. An awkward silence. "I found a message," I stuttered. "Let me guess, you want me to stop the contract?" he interrupted. "Yes, how did you know?" I inquired. "Gus has the same IP address," he replied. How stupid of me, I should have used a VPN. In my defense, I am running on fumes. I took a deep swallow. It's been a misunderstanding. The hitman casually lit up a cigarette. He seemed so at home, like he's had this exact same encounter before. "She's already paid," he said. "I can pay you more," I blurted out. He leaned in close and spoke in a hushed tone. money isn't the only reason I'm in this line of work." His words shocked me to my very core. He stood up. I panicked. "I can pay you more to kill my wife." I couldn't believe what I had just done. If someone had told me a few days ago that I would order a hit on my wife, I would have had them sectioned. Them. Old school. The hitman wrote a figure on a piece of paper along with his offshore bank account details and slid it across the table. 24 hours, he stated. I watched him leave the bar and flick his cigarette to the ground. That weekend, something odd happened between myself and Alice. We were being nice to each other. It seemed we both felt guilty for hiring a hitman. As we were doing our mundane household chores, Alice suggested, "Why don't we go out to eat?" I was taken aback by her request. We hadn't gone out for dinner in over 6 months. "Where?" I asked. "Donatello's," she replied. I smiled. "Our first date." Alice smiled back. I remember. My heart sank. Was this her way of saying goodbye? Or even worse, is she setting up a time and location for the hitman? How could she be so callous as to choose the place where we fell in love? Little does she know, she's the one in danger. I played along. Sounds good. Later that evening, we arrived outside Donatello's in an Uber. Wearing a sports jacket, I opened the door for Alice, who wore a beautiful evening dress. Yes, even though I ordered a hit on my wife, I'm still a gentleman. At dinner in the charming Italian pizzeria, our conversations were stilted. "You look tired," Alice said. "It's been a long week," I replied. That was the understatement of the decade. As the meal unfolded, we started to chat like old times. I could feel a spark between us. It was most likely the flowing wine, but we always did have chemistry. I could sense she wanted to tell me something. I asked her, "It feels like you've been somewhere else?" She looked at me, but before she could answer, the waiter arrived with our bill. I paid and left a $100 tip. And Alice laughed. "You always did over-tip. That's what I liked about you on our first date." I laughed. Was that all? Our laughter soon petered out. It was dark outside. We left the restaurant and our Uber pulled up. From a shadowy alleyway, a tall, thin man wearing a hoodie approached us and reached into his pocket. I panicked. Is the hit on my wife happening right now? I grabbed Alice's arm and yanked her toward the Uber. "What are you doing?" she cried out. I glanced behind at the hooded man who took out his cell and kept walking. In the back seat of the Uber, Alice stared at me in disbelief. What the hell was that? I couldn't answer. My heart was pounding through my chest. And then we spent the rest of the journey home in silence. A terrifying thought entered my mind. She was not at all concerned for my safety. Over the next few weeks, nothing happened. My wife spent many nights staying with friends and family. Our relationship was non-existent. Every time she left, I dreaded a knock on the door from the cops informing me that they'd found her body. What would I say to them? How would I act? I tried acting out the scene in front of the bathroom mirror, but I couldn't look at myself. The guilt and suspense were destroying me. I couldn't eat, sleep, or focus on anything. At work, the merger collapsed, and I was on the verge of losing my job. I couldn't go on living like this, so I messaged the hitman and arranged another meeting. This time, he told me to meet him at the docks. I had no choice but to agree. I needed to put an end to this. I arrived at the docks. It was pitch black except for the moonlight shining off the water. With my cell torch, I walked slowly through the maze of shipping containers. What if the hitman lured me here to kill me? After all, the best way to never get caught is to get rid of any evidence. A gust of wind shot through me. "Sah, it's getting choppy out here," the hitman called out. He appeared from behind a container and we stood face to face. It was different meeting him here as opposed to the bar. Although he was relaxed, there was something threatening about him. "I need you to call off the hit," I said firmly. The hitman smirked. "Even though she wants you dead?" I closed my eyes, the pain too much to bear. Yes, even though she wants me dead. The hitman sighed. There's a slight problem. Someone else paid me more. He removed his gun from its holster and aimed it at my chest. I stood there, shell-shocked. We had a deal. You were okay when I broke your wife's deal, he quipped. I felt like such a fool. Who in their right mind trusts a hitman off the dark web? I cried out in desperation. I can pay you more. The hitman lowered his gun slightly. I'll pay anything, I pleaded. The hitman placed his gun back into its holster. I thought about running, but I was frozen to the spot. He wrote down a number on a piece of paper and gave it to me. I stared at the ridiculous figure. There is no way on earth I could pay this. The hitman didn't blink. He was deadly serious. 24 hours, he stated. I'll throw in the guy for free. No one dies, I exclaimed. The hitman walked away. What's his name? I shouted out. The hitman continued to walk away. Speak to your loving wife. I was left alone and confused with a life and death bill I could not afford. Back at home, I desperately tried to find ways to pay the hitman. My life depended on it. I attempted to take out large loans with several banks, but they refused to lend me the money. Was there anything I could sell? I had a collection of watches, but that wouldn't come close. I even resorted to putting my kidney up for auction on the dark web, but the offers were either too low or too weird. At the same time, my mind was wandering. Who is the guy that paid the hitman more? How is he linked to my wife? I only had one option, and that was to get the guy to call off the hit. But that would mean I would have to speak to my wife, something I had dreaded since that fateful night. A nervous wreck, I sat my wife down on the couch and looked into her eyes. I was about to find out the truth. Why did she order a hitman to kill me? But before I could speak, Alice burst into floods of tears. I've been seeing someone, she wept. I stared at her in disbelief. Somehow, this betrayal felt worse than the hitman. I remained calm. Who is it? She wiped away her tears. Brad. How long? I asked. A few months, she replied. The affair made perfect sense. It tied in with Alice becoming distant and the cracks appearing between Brad and his wife at the game night. It must have been Brad who took out the hit. My wife would have inquired to the hitman as to why I was still alive. After finding out she's the target by my hands, she had no choice but to confide in Brad. Or maybe they were in it together from the beginning to get me out of the way. Out of desperation to save his lover, he agreed to pay more. I somehow managed to keep my composure. Alice continued her confession. We met at this shitty bar by the docks. At that exact moment, I realized I had been extorted. My wife never placed a hit on me. She's never even been on the dark web. The hitman was a con artist who witnessed my wife's shady encounter with Brad. By eavesdropping, he gathered enough info to set up a fake hit. He even used our cat's name Gus as my wife's username. The hitman preyed on me finding out about the affair and the idea they would conspire to get rid of me. If Alice hadn't mentioned that she met Brad at Seals, I could have ended up losing everything. Alice placed her hand on mine. Can you forgive me? I had a deep pit in my stomach. She may have had an affair, but I hired a hitman to kill her. We'll get through this, I replied. We exchanged a tight hug. Our lives slowly got back to normal. My wife will never know what I did, but I still have to live with it every day. I searched the dark web forum to retrieve the money stolen by the hitman, but his username and messages were deleted. I even ventured back to Seals, but he was long gone. It was like he never existed. I could never go to the cops. I would get a life sentence for what I've done. There is one good thing that the hitman gave us. Our marriage is no longer stale. Follow us to see more stories in our shorts or videos.